the reason why we are here today. Okay, so I know that everybody here, if you're already working in the tech space, not necessarily in fintech, you already know what Interswitch is all about. Now, Interswitch is a financial technology company, right? They have so many services. You probably already know somebody that works there at this point. But today we are going to be talking about a very, very specific topic, and it is called API versioning for fintech. What are the best practices, the pitfalls, and the industry realities? Now, I know that APIs are basically the backbone of fintech infrastructure. So everything is running on APIs to work seamlessly. Now, what happens when there's a new version of the API and then the API that you're currently working with goes down completely? So what do you do at that point? Now, that's not supposed to happen, but there are so many things that you can do to make sure that when you're building a new API, the old ones are still working. There's a plan in place so that your partners, don't have issues with existing APIs. Basically, a smooth process to make this happen, right? So today we are going to be talking about API versioning for fintech and how to make sure that it is done in the best possible way. So you're not having issues and you're not hearing that, oh, certain API is not working, and then you start calling your partners and jumping up and down. So no, 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 no. We are going to avoid all of that. So we are going to do this with Oluwatayo Farotimi. Now, let me give you a brief intro about Tayo, right? So Tayo works currently at Interswitch. Tayo has been working at Interswitch for over 10 years. Now, guys, can you imagine working, in a major financial technology company for 10 years? Imagine the number of products that he has built, like the kind of impactful things that he has worked on. So Tayo is going to basically tell us about it, right? Everything that you need to know, about API versioning. And he's an expert basically, but ideally he actually started out as a quality assurance analyst, right? So he has like, eyes for details. I know if you know a QA, everybody has probably interacted with a quality assurance analyst at some point. You know that those guys, they don't play at all. So yeah. So Tayo, thank you for joining us today. And yeah, please tell us everything that we need to know about API versioning in fintech and help us get better. All right, Tayo, over to you.
All right. Please confirm you can hear me. Good morning,
Yes,
everyone.
good morning.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Okay. All right. All right. So shortly I'll be sharing my screen. Please confirm once you can see my screen. Okay. All right. Hi Betty. Thank you very much. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. All right. Okay. So basically, just as Betty has mentioned, so we are here to just 1 second. So we have to just know more about API versioning for fintechs, and basically talking about the best practices, where there are pitfalls, how you can avoid them, and also what we have as industry realities. All right. Okay, so in the course of the session, I'll be walking us through these major outlines. So basically, just to know more about the fundamentals of API versioning, also knowing about bringing it back home in the Nigerian context, and also talking about the common pitfalls and how we can actually avoid the pitfalls. Then also, what are the industry benchmark? I will talk about the best practices, and then we then draw up like a conclusion from all that is going to be said, basically. All right, so I'll start with the fundamentals of API versioning. And then I'd like to start from this angle to say, just as we all know that change is actually inevitable. And even in our day-to-day life, we know that change is actually inevitable. Change will always come up. It's always constant. Similar to, we can also bring that back home to the tech space to say that with regards to API development, also change is inevitable. So you have rolled out a particular API probably 10 years ago. The reality has changed. A lot of fintech have been coming up, new trends have come out, and we need to evolve. So if we are still in that space of, oh, I remember back then, then when we used to have APIs, we started with probably a few older versions of having like a SOAP version of API where you have to have your format in an XML format. And I know that for the devs that we have at the time, they are probably used to building their APIs in SOAP version. But nowadays, the newer developers that we have these days, they are not very familiar with SOAP technology. They rather prefer you give them like a JSON, like a REST API. So it's actually very easier for them to run with. So I'm just saying that if you have been in that space, so because you started with SOAP and you have remained in that space, what that means is that when you have newer consumers coming to consume your APIs, and because they're not familiar with your stack, they probably look elsewhere for what the competitors have. So if competitors have done something better with a familiar technology, obviously they will always tilt towards that. And that's why I would say that change is actually very inevitable in the API development space. The next thing I'll talk about here with regards to fundamentals is letting us know that developers update APIs to fix security issues, a couple of things to improve performance, to also maybe don't to add newer features. So you have to have a rationale for why you want to update your API, bearing in mind that you already have consumers that have actually connected, integrated to your API. So you have to factor in that, oh, the change you're about to make, you should be sure that that change will not break what is working. More like you are ensuring that whatever new changes you are making is actually backward compatible, basically. So again, some updates, they can be visible to the users, some may not be visible. And when I say not visible, is that you could for someone that's created to your API before, probably in a particular request that they are sending to the API to the endpoint, maybe the response they are feeding them back with before now, you've not been sending them maybe the response or maybe the first name that they actually set in their request. And for whatever reason, let's say, for example, if there is now the need for you to start persisting the first name in your database, so that kind of change is actually a very minor change. So because it's a response and you're not introducing the additional you're not modifying an existing field, you can actually pass a metadata like a new field. And then once you send that request to them and then you get the response back, they send the request to you, you get the response back, you tend to persist that in your database. But what happened in reality is that if there's no way that you are ensuring that that request, that your consumers, they are sending that request, what happens in the database is that you then see that your data will be inconsistent. So there are scenarios whereby you see that, oh, some particular consumers, they are sending the first name and then you are persisting it in your database. But for others that have not actually started sending the first name in the request payload, you see that in your database, it's probably empty or you're passing a null value invariably. That's what that means. And then we also talk about API versioning, like we said, that is why we are here. So API versioning actually helps you manage updates safely. And we're going to know more about how we can actually manage all of these updates that will not disrupt what is currently working. Then we also talk about how API would help us maintain trust, customer trust. So because again, if you are trying to update your API, nobody says that you should not update your API. And again, like I said, there must be a strong rationale because you have to know that you have lots of consumers that have been integrated to your API. So if for whatever reason you've done all your checks and there is that need for you to actually scale up your API, you need to update existing API, then you must ensure that you are communicating to your stakeholders way earlier before you roll it out so that they are informed. So they have to make any change. They can also plan at their hand because remember that in the fintech space that we have, in the space we have, it's not all organizations that have enough resources. So many things are very lean. So they also because at the beginning of every financial year, like we do at Interswitch, we have a roadmap where we have actually said this is a strategy that I want to run with in this particular financial. I know that it's also applicable in other fintech space. So because the organization has actually planned that I want to roll out this number of features and I have it in my roadmap. So imagine you as an API provider that you have connected to your service, and because in the course of that particular financial year, there is that need for you to actually update your API. So if you don't do communications to them, they cannot know how to plan these new changes into their own current regular BAU. So that's why for you to actually ensure that you have the trust, your customers trust you. When there's need for you to actually update your API, you need to go back, send communications to all your consumers, letting them know when the depletion timeline will be, when there will be an end of life, and also notifying them ahead why you need to make that change. And again, in the course of this session, we'll also tell us how we can actually do this better, that again, it will not disrupt what is currently working. So I would like to just define API versioning in my own word as the process of managing and tracking changes to an API. Again, it involves communicating. I said it earlier in my last point. I said it involves communicating those changes to the API consumer, because you cannot just do them alone. You cannot just at the corner of your own organization just roll out changes without properly informing your consumer, because it's going to break a lot of stuff. They need to be aware before you go ahead and then roll out those changes. And again, simply, it's a mechanism to manage changes in an API without breaking existing integration. We tend to learn more about it because of my presentation. All right, so why is this important to fintech sector? We need to know why. Why do we need to version our APIs? So number one point I have here is that, one, API power payments. In the fintech space, just like Betty mentioned, you have a lending service, you want to accept payments, you have a wallet service. So APIs are very, very powerful. They're very powerful too. So it's important that if you want to do version, you need to consider that these APIs will the power payments, banking, wallet service, lending service, whatever it is, so that you are conscious that whatever you are doing, it does not stop transaction flow. That is why it's important that you factor in all of this in the course of you answering the question of why is it important for you to actually have versions in your different APIs that you have. Then the next point is multiple partners, multiple systems. What do I mean? So remember that you, as the API provider, you obviously have consumers that have integrated to your service. So as you are trying to scale up your APIs, are trying to make modifications to your existing APIs, you need to worry about the different partners that you have. Again, partners have their own different nuances. Partners have their own different use cases as to why they have come to consume your API. So partners also have their own different systems as to how they are calling your API. So in you going ahead to say you want to put another scale up another version to what you currently have, you need to factor in the different use cases of how your partners, how they are using your API. If you're able to answer this question, that will then help you drive how you want to design the new version that you want to introduce to your API. Then the next one is it could be a regulatory pressure. Now, I'll give an example. Back in the day, when we go to a bank to open an account, there was no mention of BVN. You just go to the bank and then you go to the banking hall, and then they ask you for just regular KYC, just like Betty asked, what's KYC? Know your customer. And what do they ask you? As an individual, they probably just ask you for your first name, your last name, do you have a means of ID card? You provide that. They ask you for your house address. You have an utility bill that you can also use to back up that this is where you also stay. So you provide all of that as a basic requirement for an individual who wants to open an account in the bank. If you're not taking back, say 10, if I'm not mistaken, I think about 8-9 years ago, they introduced BVN and they said, oh, every account holder must have a BVN tied to the account. So imagine that you have an API and the CBN now comes tomorrow to say, oh, you have introduced an API whereby your consumer, they call you, they want to create an account. And then prior to that time, all you just ask, like I said, is just first name, last name, address, phone number, means of ID, and then it ends there. So if tomorrow CBN comes and say, yes, BVN is now a mandatory requirement, so you have to introduce this to your request payload. So this is the regulatory pressure. So because of this, you also have to communicate. Otherwise, if you don't add this to what you have in your API, what would then happen is if CBN should come for auditing and they see that you are not asking your consumers to provide BVN, you know what that means? They're going to slam a huge sanction on you. I know when CBN comes to sanction you, the fine is not it's not a small money. It's not actually a very big fine. That is what that is talking about. Next one is security and fraud controls. So I'd like to give an example of how this is important. Now, let's say in the API that you have introduced that you have, let's say your consumers, when they are calling you maybe for like an API that actually allow them to probably send OTP, and then you also have to validate the OTP. So imagine they are sending the OTP in string, a plain text to you, and then you suddenly realize that, oh, you are seeing that people are beginning to compromise what is being sent to your service. Because of that, you need to actually beef up security. And what do you now? You've seen there's a vulnerability in that with people sending OTP to you as plain text, and then you now want to start saying, okay, before the version 2 that you want to release, you want to now say, okay, let's find a way to start encrypting the OTP. So before you send the OTP to me as my consumer, I'll give you a key that you use to encrypt the OTP so that it's not going to come out in clear text or in plain text. When it gets to my service as AP provider, I will then decrypt so that I can read the OTP and then use that to validate what I originally sent to the consumer. So that is why when there's need for that, then you know that you need to also find another version. And the why you're creating another version is so that you give a timeline so that whoever that is already on the existing version, you give that timeline for them to go and update their documentation, update their integration, integrate to the new version whereby you have given them a key that will allow them increase before sending the data to you, basically. Versioning also impacts partners and customer trust. Yes, we cannot overemphasize this. So if you don't inform your customers ahead of time, what would then happen? When they start seeing that transactions have started failing, they become worried, they become agitated, they start escalating, and all of that eventually will lead to a reputational damage. And if you look at my screen on my right, I try to just paint a small scenario here. So let's say today you are trying to make your client is calling this endpoint. That's they are calling with the post method v1/transfer. And then what they are expecting in the response from you is a transaction reference, transaction_ref. So they are familiar with that. They've done their integration with that. They understand that once I see transaction_ref, I can map it to my own end. And this is the reference that is coming back from the API provider. And then if in the newer version, you have seen a need for you to probably have a new version. And then in that new version, what you are now passing back to your consumer is no longer transaction_ref. Rather, you're now passing TXN_ref. The contract has changed. Remember that your consumers, they introduced what they integrated to originally was the endpoint, and in the response, they are getting transaction_ref. But in this case, the contract has changed because they're now saying what they should be seeing as reference number. It is now TXN_ref. This is going to break their code. And if you did not communicate to them that, oh, you need to modify your code, or you need to modify your integration, or and then you then roll that out to production, the impact will be huge. And as I try to just paint a scenario that imagine you just roll that out and then you are not aware that, oh, your consumers they need to go and modify their code also. What if you do that in 30 minutes, depending on the volume of consumers that are calling your API, depending on the volume that you receive on a per minute basis, it could be very huge that over 35,000 calls will start failing before you then realize that, oh, you've actually done something that you was not thoroughly tested by your QA team. That is why it's important that for any time we were doing any versioning, using any new version, whether it's a patch, it's a major version, it's a minor version, we need to communicate ahead and also give a timeline on what is the plan for deprecation, basically. And because it's the payment space, also it's important to know that a breaking change in your API can freeze payments. It will delay settlements or even violate CBN reporting rules, basically. Okay, so what are the 4 main versioning strategies? So I'll start with the URI version. So this is actually the most common that I've seen in this the trend that we have seen in recent time. So this is very straightforward. You have an existing version. Remember that I give an example of you are doing a v1/transfer, and if you have to modify, given that's the previous example that I gave, that the response payload, a parameter has changed. You are changing from transaction_ref to TXN_ref. In that case, it's safer for you to actually introduce a new version and call it /v2. So that way, whoever that is on v1, they will still continue with their v1. Nothing is breaking. However, you communicate to them that in X number of days or in X number of months, we'll be duplicating this. We need to actually cut over and integrate to our v2. So that way, nothing is going to break. Similar to when I talk about the encryption of, you need to encrypt your OTP and all of that. So have a separate version. So this is one way you can actually manage a version. The other way is in your header. So in the header that the customer is calling you with, you can also specify the version in your header. So again, there is no perfect strategy that we can say that a strategy is actually can be used as one size fits all. So depending on your use case, depending on what problem you are trying to solve, that would generally inform what type of versioning strategy that you want to do. And the third one is in your query params. So you can also, the way we use query params today to probably paginate our endpoints, our APIs, you can also use your query params to also indicate if a version is changed so that at least your consumers, they are aware that, oh, if I start passing in version in my query params, it means that I am calling a different version. So that's another way you can actually version your API, the strategy you can actually use for API versioning. And the last one I have is your content negotiation. So in this also, in your content, today you have different content type where you can actually say you're allowing maybe application JSON, application slash XML. So you can actually add many parameters in your what's it called, in your content type, and that's what we call the content negotiation. So you need to let your users, your consumers, be aware of what they need to start passing, so that way you can separate it. But like I said, the most common that I have seen in recent time that people are very, very familiar with, that they actually use when there is need for them to have another version, is actually the URI based versioning, and it's the most common. Again, like I said, there is no one size fits all. You need to be sure of who your customers are, what are their use cases, what are they using your APIs for. All of that will then inform how you want to design your API, and also the type of versioning strategy that you want to go with, basically. So Nigerian context, we want to talk about the documentation gaps and how to bridge them, pretty much. So let's bring this back home. We've talked about a lot about API versioning, the strategy, and when you need to actually have another version. But let us look at the gaps. What we don't really look at, versioning strategy. Now, like I gave an example, so you want to move from a V1 to a V2. So how do you want to bridge this gap? You need to explicitly document your versioning approach. So your users should be aware. That's why in the API space, the best API that you have, no matter if your API is working and you do not properly document how your API works, it's going to be a struggle for your consumers that want to come and integrate. So you must explicitly document what is changing and what versioning approach, what versioning strategy you are also using in your documentation. And the next one is, one second, let me just pick my, next one is your change logs. So introducing the change logs also help your consumers to be aware of what is changing, because you can actually say, oh, maybe on these dates you are rolling out a new version. You are also letting them know what is changing. You can also do like a comparison. See, this before now, this is what we are telling you to send to us. This is what we are responding back with. This is now what we are sending it to you. This is what you'll be getting as a response. So there is a way they can actually track. And again, what change log also does is that it helps you even know how your API is performing, how you have moved from when you first rolled out to where you are currently. And again, another advantage of doing change log is that, like I give an example earlier to say, if you have a lean team, the engineers are not so much. So if you have somebody that is in charge of a particular API, say for example, maybe the API that allows people transfer, and then in that, if that developer resigns and leaves the organization, because we have actually will be consistent with having a structured change logs in place. So if the engineer leaves tomorrow, you bring in a new engineer, it's not going to take that new engineer time to understand how this API has evolved over time. So in that way, the new developer can quickly come and hit the ground running. But if you don't have a change log in place, it means that if you bring a new developer tomorrow, the previous one has resigned, it's going to take a while before that developer can actually match up to the momentum that you have currently. Now, also, it's important to also have duplication notice. You need to let your developers, your consumers be aware of when you want to actually duplicate this particular API, this particular version, when it's going to be the end of life. And then in your header, so you can actually use tools like even Swagger to actually pass notification in the header so that they are aware that, oh, this API is going to be duplicated at a specific time, so that as they are calling their API, they are aware that, oh, your documentation, you have put it there that, oh, it's going to be duplicated at also time. So that's another way you can actually use to close the gap, in the gaps to documentation gaps. Now, migration guides. So if you don't provide the migration guides, what that invariably means is that your consumers will practically just spend hours trying to do trial and error with what you could have actually specified in your migration guide. So you have to have a guide that will let them know that, oh, this is the step-by-step on if you need to migrate from V1 to V2. You can also go as far as even giving them like a call where they are able to just import everything from your call that has to do with the endpoints, the headers, the type of token that is required, what the request payload looks like, what the response payload looks like. So they can actually provide examples of such. So that way, you are actually helping them manage how they can actually migrate seamlessly from V1 to V2. Now, version specific examples also. So you need to also still, example is that they will be unable to test or debug on older versions. So the fact that introducing a new version should not mean that they can no longer use your test on your old version. So on your Swagger dock, on your stoplights, there are tools like that I can actually put there that you're actually putting the V1 there. They can see that, oh, this for V1, this for V2, and they are able to still continue their testing on whichever of the version, so long that the time of duplication has not elapsed. And like I said earlier, backward compatibility notes. So again, if you don't put notes out there to say, oh, this is what you need to be to actually do at your hand, what that means is that it's going to lead to a lot of integration and failure unexpectedly. So you can actually automate all of this with open API comparison tools that also allow them to see that, oh, previously this is how, maybe prior to that time, the way you are the token that they are calling you is just an API key. But now you are saying I need them to use their client ID and secret to need like a barrier token. So you need to actually let them know what's the difference so that they are aware, so that when they are migrating, when they are integrating, they are aware that, oh, the way I'm calling you as with regards to token, it's not going to be just passing the API key. It's not going to be like a basic auth. Maybe I'm not required to pass maybe a barrier token, for example. So they need to be aware of what they need to start passing. And then lastly, what I have here is outdated examples or links. So the fact that you are also introducing a new version. So you have actually the documentation that you have. So let's say you have actually rolled out to a new version, and then you don't have examples that would actually portray how they can actually use this API, or maybe like a code snippet that actually documents what this new version is. You are still making reference to your older version. So the way to solve this is that have like an automated CI/CD pipeline, so that as you are writing your code, as you are making those code changes, your Swagger doc is automatically updated, so that the users, consumers that have integrated to your service prior to that time, they are aware of what has changed and how they can also keep testing on the newer versions that you are building. All right. So poor documentation, just a short note here, amplifies versioning issues, and the developer shouldn't have to guess what has changed. So they need to know what has changed in your V2 based on what you have documented. So again, the way to go is that make version visibility a design principle. We cannot overemphasize that. It has to be a design principle. All right. So again, on with regards to Nigerian context, yes, let's know about, okay, how long should we say we want to leave the older API? When should we say it's the end of life for the older API? And also, what are the channels with which you can actually also communicate this new version to all of our consumers? So I'll start with the communication channels, communication timelines rather. So now again, our reality, sadly, is that many of our customers, many of our merchants, our consumers, our businesses, they don't upgrade promptly, and we do not blame them. You know, like I started with, I said at the beginning of every financial year, an organization would have sat down to say, oh, in this FY, this is my strategy of how I want to grow. I want to move to my landing zone. So you have planned in your roadmap what are the things that you want to do in your roadmap, and then you already have the resources that are on ground to deliver the roadmap that you have planned at the beginning of your financial year. And then the API provider that you not even cater, you are not even thinking about them, because for you, as far as you are concerned, you are calling their API, there are no issues, everything is fine. In the middle of your financial year, they just come and inform you that, oh, we are rolling out another API. But because your team is lean, you don't even have the capacity to actually pick that up instantly. So our reality is that in many cases, even if you have communicated, you say, oh, I will duplicate this API in 3 months, in 6 months, you might still have one very powerful customer that is giving you volume that has not upgraded. What will you then do? Are you going to now say you're going to shut it down? Remember, you will lose revenue also. So that is, unfortunately, is our reality. Now, but for me, I'm saying that if at all you have to duplicate the older version, best practice, in my opinion, is give 6 to 12 months. Again, this is also very relative. How do I mean? It also depends on what you're actually rolling out. If you have like a compliance issue, if CBN has said start collecting BBN or start collecting NIN, CBN will give you a timeline, whether you like it or not. If you don't want to be fined or probably CBN revoking your license, you have to do that within a stipulated time. So again, but if it's not something that it's a major like that, you can actually work within 6 to 12 months, basically. Now, what are the multi-channel notifications that you can actually use to notify your consumers that you are actually introducing a new version. So the first one is via email. So you should have the emails of your customer. You can notify them via emails, and then you can also continue to send reminders, because again, one email alone does not solve it. You need to constantly keep reminding them that, oh, we're doing a new version. This is the timeline. These are the things I need to do. Give them a guide. All of those things well spelled out in your email. The other one is maybe via Slack. So today, I know that when people are integrating to APIs today, so that we can actually get faster responses, we tend to just spin up like a Slack channel or a Teams channel, or even a WhatsApp, so that if whoever that is integrating, if you encounter any blocker, you don't have to wait until you are sending email. You can just do a chat, and then you have your integration engineers on the same channel group that they can also help respond, so that the guys that is integrating can actually know what to do next. I can actually move very fast, because again, what I see that happen most times is that if you don't provide these channels where people can come to probably relay whatever blockers that they have, what then happen if they keep sending mail or if they keep calling, they get frustrated. And if care is not taken, they may eventually look elsewhere for a computer that's probably serious. So again, with regards to you notifying them ahead that you want to have a new version, aside you send them an email, you can also keep sending notification via whatever channel that was created when they were actually integrating at the time. Then the third one is, if your API, if you have like a dashboard where people can log in, a portal where they can log in, they can actually have like a notification pop-up that will just be there, flashing it to them every time they log in. That please be informed that this particular API slash v1 slash payment API will be duplicated at so date. So when they see that, there's that conscious reminder that comes to their mind that, oh, so if they have not started integrating to the version 2 from their side, then they need to know how to hasten things up, because we've given them, we provided notification to them via their dashboard, email, Slack, Teams, whatever it is. They don't have any option. You can also do that also using the webbook. So webbook based version. So in your webbook, you can also introduce like a metadata. That every time you send a web notification to them, they are letting them know that, oh, this API will be getting it at this particular time. So again, you are exploring all the channels, so that when you want to finally cut over, then you know that there's not like, it's not like I say we were not informed. That will not be the case. All right, so communication is half the battle. Multi-channel notification increases adoption speed. So if you have notification via multiple channel, it's going to increase adoption speed. People are going to quickly cut over or migrate to the newer version. So think of versioning as a marketing challenge, not just a tech issue. So you need to go all out and see that you're actually informing your consumers. Okay, so what are the common pitfalls and how can we avoid them? So what are the pitfalls? So the first one I also give recommendations. So the first one I'll talk about is silent breaking changes. So you are introducing a new code. To you, it might look minor, but remember that the contract in your API, the consumers, they have actually written their own code based on the contract that they are shared with them. So whatever you are doing, if they are changing that contract, be conscious that it's going to eventually break their code. So what you need to do is to document those changes and notify them early. You cannot overemphasize it. So when they are aware, they can now factor in how they want to improve, upgrade their own system to actually be compatible with the new version you introduce. Second pitfall is maintaining too many versions. It's not good. So it's not proper to say you have a particular endpoint and you have a V1, a V2, a V3, a V4. It does not make any sense. It's actually very costly, because what that means is that every time you have to worry about, if you have to make any change, you have to worry about doing it on the V1, on the V2, on the V3, on the V4. And that's because you have not actually duplicated the older versions. So it is not advisable. So if at all you want to have multiple versions, best practice is have just 2 versions. So limited supported version. I would advise that just have 2 versions. However, there should be plan in place to actually just duplicate the other version and just maintain just a single version. Now, poor communication with partners. You are not communicating early to your partner that you want to duplicate a particular version. You're not letting them know ahead of time that, oh, this particular API will be going down in a particular date. It's important that you communicate properly. Now, yesterday night, I got an email just about 11:30 p.m. that from one of our API providers that a particular API, they are trying to do maintenance that would start from 10 a.m. today to 10 p.m. today, and I am getting the email notification at 11:30 p.m. That is so wrong, because I also have consumers that are integrated to me. I need to communicate that. So I'm going to start sending them mail at 10:30 p.m. That is why it's always good to notify them early. So you don't wait until when it's dying minute before you start notifying your partners. As long as immediately I've started thinking about, I want to do this, I want to update my API, then you need to start sending early notification, early communication to your partners, basically. Now, ignore regulatory constraints. You know what this means? Regulator has said do this, and you're trying to ignore it. Obviously, there will be a big sanction. So how can you avoid this? So when there's a regulatory requirement, you're not clear on how to go about it, involve your compliance team. Compliance team, it is their core. They are the SME. They will be able to advise you properly. And then not planning for sunset policies. Again, basically just talking about you're using a new version. You're not thinking about when you want to duplicate it. If you're not doing that, it means that even your consumers, because you've not given them a timeline as to when it's going to be the end of life for that API, they will just stay on it and they are fine, because again, it's not priority to them. They are focused on their regular BAU. As long as they're not putting a timeline to when you want to duplicate that API, they just move on like it's not important. So you need to plan for that. You need to define it. You need to enforce timelines, basically. Now, so how do you version an API? So we've talked about versioning strategies, we've talked about the pitfalls, we've talked about our reality in Nigeria. Then let us even talk about how do we want to version an API. So the first thing I'll talk about here is you need to confirm whether a new version is necessary. Is it necessary? You need to do all your due diligence, check very well, because again, if you introduce a new version, there's that likelihood that you might break what is working previously. So you need to do all your research, all your design thinking process, all of those things. Check with your customers, understand their use cases. Is there a reason why you want to do a B2? Is it very important? So ask yourself all of these questions. If it's a yes, then you also need to choose your versioning strategy. Recall that I had mentioned that you can go the URI route, the header route, or even the query params route, or even the content negotiation route. So depending on your API, what problem it is addressing, you then need to determine or define what versioning strategy do you want to adopt, basically. And then after doing that, you need to go ahead and update your documentation so that your users, your consumers, your users, they actually are aware of what is changing. And then you now need to gradually deploy the new version. For me, best practice is that if you're rolling out a new version, you don't need to go full bang, like you don't need to go like all out. You can actually start testing with a few of your customers. So let them start, ask them to just only them migrate them to the new version and then see the performance, so that if there is need for you to actually go back and modify or optimize or improve what you have done, you have that window to do that, as opposed to now you going live and then when all your customers start calling, probably not factor in the traffic that will be coming, and then you see that your APIs, you are not also worrying about rate limiting. After multiple API calls, you are sending 500 back to your clients. So you need to actually gradually deploy the new version. And when you see that, oh, you have achieved stability, then you can now communicate this is when the end of life would be, basically. And then lastly, you can now deprecate the older version. So once you have achieved stability, you then go ahead and deprecate the older version. All right, so industry benchmark at a glance. So I'll talk about the area, the benchmark. Versioning style. I think I'm running out of time. So versioning style, you talk about, like I said earlier, just maintain a single strategy, whether you want to use URI method or the header strategy. So you need to also communicate. That's what we see in the industry today. And I said, like I said earlier, the most common that I've seen is the URI versioning strategy. Supported version. So you need to also have like a maximum of 2 active sessions, active versions, like I mentioned earlier. So you don't need to start having to maintain multiple or too many versions. You have a V1, a V2, a V3, a V4, a V5, a V10, abba. What is it? Life is not that hard. So try and maintain just 2 active version, and best practice is just try and do just 1 at a time, basically. Same verb principles. So this is like saying that you have the semantic version, like you have like an x.y.z, you have like maybe the x is actually like a major change. That major change can actually cause your consumer's code to break. So you need to also worry about that. A 2 is a minor. Probably are trying to just optimize it, you're trying to improve security. Then a 1 can just be a patch, probably a bug fix. So, but know that a breaking changes equals to a major change, meaning that it is actually a major change. That's when their code will break. In such scenarios, you need to communicate and let your consumers be aware that who would be deprecating this service because of X and Y reasons, basically. Then also you need to let them know about the deprecation notice. Like I said, 6 to 12 months. Again, this is not in all cases. It's depending on what's the use case, what problem, or where that request is coming from, or why do you need to have another version, basically. Documentation, complete version specific documentation. So the fact that you have a V1 and you have another V2 does not mean that in your documentation you have taken out V1. Because remember that you still have people that are still connected to V1. If they have issues, they can always refer to your documentation. But if when they have issues that are coming and they are saying that what they have is a V2, it's not going to help them. So basically, now stability. So see that you have stabilized before you then say you want to roll out. You have to do a lot of thorough testing, and then a dedicated test environment that your consumers can actually play around with while they are integrating, basically. And then, like I said, communication, multi-channel approach. You need to communicate via email, Slack, whatever communication channel that you have during integration. Maybe on the dashboard, have like a pop-up that will let them know about notification, about when it will be duplicated, and all of those things. So again, industry best practice is to avoid breaking consumers' existing integration. So whatever you have to do, it can be a patch or just a minor change. So what you should ensure is that 90%, 90 to 95% of your customers, what you are doing should actually be backward compatible, meaning that it must not break their code. In that regard, you don't have to worry about updating your newer version. So just try, if I thought you have to update your API, try as much as possible to see how you can actually make it backward compatible. It's only when in scenarios whereby you see that, we need to do a newer version. That is when you cannot use a newer version and then communicate end of life timeline. All right, best practice for API versioning. Design with extensibility in mind, meaning that your API is designed with that mindset that, you want to scale your APIs tomorrow. Have that mindset while you are designing your API. It's going to really help you so that when you have to roll out minor changes, your consumers need not worry about them migrating to a V2. You can just maintain that on your V1, basically. Know your customers. Again, as you are planning on, you want to version, choose a new version, you need to know your customers. What are the use cases? What are they using your APIs for? For some, it might just be let me just call it to just help me process payments. But for other people, they can also be using your API for settlements. So you need to know your customers and what they are using your APIs for, basically. And then include a versioning policy in your terms and conditions, so that if tomorrow CBN has come and said you need to introduce NIN to the parameters that your consumers are sending to you, you need to have that in your terms and conditions, so that if a consumer is trying to prove stubborn and say, I'm not ready for that, I'm your biggest customer, you can only, and the issue now it got escalated, and then you now begin to now say, did you guys capture this in your terms and conditions? So if that is not that, the consumer can insist and say, I'm not ready yet. And then for you, eventually, what do you have to do? It's going to be a tough one, but if you have all of this documented in your terms and conditions, the advantage is that if you want to roll out a new version tomorrow, you don't have a problem, basically. The couple implementation versioning and contract versioning. So separate what implementation versioning is and what do I mean in your version. So say, for example, you have seen that there's a security vulnerability that you've seen, you want to optimize, you want to beef up security. So that is implementation versioning. Separate that from your contract version. Contract version is not talking about your consumers. They are used to these contracts. They know what the request is, what the expected response is. So try to separate the two. So we're trying to optimize your API. You don't need to change your contract. Basically, that's what I'm trying to talk about. So just decouple the version strategy versioning from your contract versioning. Again, test thoroughly. In the conversation, we were told that I was a former QA. QAs, we pay attention to details. So because if you go to production, if what was working before is no longer working, what they will first ask you is that who tested it. So that is why before you roll out to another version, you need to test thoroughly and then document your changes. Let people be aware of what is changing, what was there before, what is now changing. You can even have like a color, the way you have it, that maybe the red is showing that You can use tools that will let them know that this is what we had before, this is the new one, and all of those things basically. Plan for duplication, like I said, then leveraging on AI. So today, what AI is coming to, has come to stay. Let us put it that way. So you need to start thinking about what you can actually use AI for. I was in a session yesterday that the head of engineering in my organization was trying to even tell us that we have some of these AI tools at our disposal, but we are not using it optimally. And what did he do? He got like a data of transaction volume from a couple of our merchants, and then he just wrote to AI like a prompt to say, AI, using this data, can you tell me my top 10 customers, and also give me a trend on when there was a decline in their day-to-day transaction? And then in 3 seconds, AI came up with data. We saw the top 10 customers. We saw a particular date when there was a downtime, when their transaction volume reduced. And AI also suggested that at this time, these are the likely because probably there was a downtime. So imagine you having to pull that data yourself, interpret the data, and they are going for an NPR, for example, and you don't have the luxury of time of you analyzing data by yourself. Get the data, put on AI. AI will just help you come up with the report that you want, even a one pager, and then you are good to go. So as part of AI versioning, sorry, as part of API versioning, you can leverage on AI so that you are also trying to make life easy for your consumers. Imagine your consumers, you have actually deployed like AI agents to your APIs, and your consumer, because you have told them that you want to port over to a V2, you also give them like an idea that they can actually talk to the AI agent and say, oh, can you give me like a code snippet I can use instead? And the AI generates a code that they can use to integrate. So what that does for them is that they don't have to worry about writing the code manually one by one. The AI will just give them the code base, and then they'll just slam it on their existing code base, and they are good, and they move on. So as part of when we are thinking of versioning our APIs, also have it in mind that how can we make life easy for our consumers? If you can actually deploy agents that can help them, give them like a code base of what they need to integrate to, what they need to modify on their previous integration, it makes life easy for them. They will be happy. They will jump at it. So even if you have communicated that you will duplicate it in 10 months, but when they know that, oh, they have tools that can help them, give them what they need to do, I can tell you that in 1 week, they will go live, basically. So in conclusion, one poorly communicated breaking change can cascade across thousands of customers, your merchants, your business, your organization, and users, which eventually would cause first significant revenue loss. So if you do not communicate timely, it's going to lead to significant revenue loss, because what that means, the example I gave earlier to say you change your response, one of the response parameter to start having TRX underscore ref as opposed to what was there before, transaction underscore ref, that is going to break a lot of things. So it's going to lead to significant revenue loss. And the second is it's going to lead to broken checkout flows and abandoned transactions, because obviously transaction will not be completed because the contract has changed. So it's going to lead to all of this. And then again, because of that, the implication is they will not trust you again. They begin to look elsewhere for alternative. They start looking for migrating to Continuous API that are relatively stable, that they don't just wake up in the night and say they want to just go to version 2 all of a sudden. And then lastly, it's going to be a reputational damage for your organization. So again, the future of fintech API collaboration in Nigeria depends on disciplined versioning practices, like we said, the best practices, and also treat versioning as part of your product's brand promise, basically. So thank you very much. That'll be the end of my slide.
All right. Thank you so much, Tayo. That was a very, very insightful session. Like, I really love how you broke it down. So I'm sure that every one of us here has learned, one or two about API versioning. And I think one thing that really stuck out for me is that it's not just about updating an endpoint, right? There's so many things that goes into it, right? Documenting your changes, managing your partners, ensuring that there's enough timeline for them to migrate, planning the entire migration process, and then most of all, right, protecting the customer experience. Because at the end of the day, you're building for the customers, maybe directly or indirectly. So I think this is something that everybody has learned so much about. Thank you so much, Tayo, and the Interswitch team. All right. So we'll be taking questions now. So if you have any questions for Tayo, this is the time. This is the time to drop it. You can just raise up your hand or drop it in the comment section, and then we'll address it. Anybody? Okay, Oladimeji. All right, you can go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Tayo. Good morning, everyone. So, I think while you were presenting, you made mention of regulatory compliance, and sometimes you could have some changes by what's it called, possibly let's say CBN, and then it might force you to make a contract change with your API. So, an hypothetical scenario where you have one of your biggest clients, or should I say one of your biggest consumer, had refused to migrate and possibly threatened to leave your business. And the change is very mandatory. Let's say sometimes, CBN can just give you 2 months. And if you don't make that change thereabouts, you are charged. What strategy would you advise to mitigate such, should I say, loss, considering the fact that this person is your biggest client, and the loss of that customer equals to a loss in volume of transaction and even revenue? What would you do? Because in this case now you're in a fix, right? You can't, because of that change, just migrate. And when I mean migrate, I'm talking about possibly a total shutdown of that API. Remember, if, let's say, for example, CBN is saying, oh, for every, what's it called? For every onboarding for a new customer, now passing your NIN and what's it called? Just like sooner than later, everybody might have to pass in their, what's it called? Tax ID. How would you actually mitigate such scenario, considering data consistency? Because if that consumer is not passing in that particular field or data, it might cause a lot of inconsistency in data that you are recording and even send it to CBN. Yeah, so I don't know. That's my question. I don't know if it's clear enough or I want to refresh it.
All right, thank you, Dimeji. Thank you for that question. It's actually a very tough one. It's a very tough one. And I would like to start by saying that every customer is key. And I also appreciate the fact that you laid emphasis on that this is actually one of your top customers. So if it's actually one of your top customers, and again, like I also give an example to say, for them, they already have their own regular BAU that they have, that they are trying to execute what they have in their roadmap. And if this customer is saying that, oh, we don't have time for this just yet, and you don't want to lose revenue, you don't want to lose that customer to a competitor, you don't want to just forcefully just cut over everybody and then duplicate the older version. So in that case, in my opinion, I would rather say that a strategy that you can actually adopt would be that you can actually have your own engineering team, help them make that change, and then just give them the code base and have a plan on how they can actually update their code base, and you can work with them. And then I think that would work because you are already thinking about them, you are factoring them as part of your migration plan. So if you have that scenario, I think it won't be a bad idea, because considering the fact that they are bringing in probably your largest revenue from that API. So it won't be a bad idea to say, oh, I can actually bring in my engineering team and help them make this integration upgrade and then hand the code base over to them. I think that would work.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
So we have another question. Oluwatayo, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Tayo, for the session. So my question is, take for instance, you are an API provider, and then let's say your biggest client wants you to make an update to the API, and then you offer API services, everyone is using your service. How do you handle that situation when your customer wants you to make an update to the API, and you know that the API is going to affect every other customers? So basically, what would you do in that kind of situation?
And so it's very, very easy. So again, emphasis on one of your biggest customers. So if they wanted to make a change to your API, so remember that I mentioned to say you need to know your customers. you need to understand how your customers are interacting with your API. So you need to be able to think about everything end to end so that you will know that, oh, this change that this my biggest customer is asking for, if I go ahead, it might break my other customers. And am I ready to start communicating that to them? It's something that I need to even worry them about in the first place. So if you're able to answer these questions, it will then inform what approach to take. So if it is the case that, oh, what the biggest customer is asking for is something that you know that, oh, every of the other customer can actually benefit from it, you can go the route of having a separate version and then you communicate the timeline to all your customers. But if you have looked at it and you see that, oh, this is just for their own consumption alone, you might just choose and say, okay, you know what, I might just leave you on just this, what's it called, on this version. I'm on a new version, create a new version for them and just for them alone to work. Again, the disadvantage of that is that you're now having to worry about multiple versions. Another approach could now be that even though they're asking you to start sending this in their own request, so you can extend your own API to say, let's say in the request that they are sending, they've not been sending a terminal ID, for example, and maybe that terminal ID is actually unique on their own side, as your consumer side, and they want you to help them return that terminal ID in the response that is coming back from your service. So what would then happen is that in your own case, when they pass that terminal ID in your request, so you make provision from your own API to accept it. So if it comes, it's not going to be a compulsory parameter. So if it comes, because they are the ones sending it, you can now persist it in the response that you're sending back to them. Now, for the other guys that they don't need the terminal ID because they don't need it for anything, so they don't have to pass it because, again, your contract in your request has said it's not compulsory. So it's just this person that needs it. So when they pass it, you help them persist it and then give it back to them in the response. I think that's another way you can actually use to address it.
Okay, Tayo. So we have one question in the chat. And this is in relation to the first question that was asked. So it's basically riding on it. It said, still on what the last speaker said, how do we communicate this information from your example, NIN ahead of time?
Yeah, pretty much like I said, if I go back to my slide, there are different communication. Ensure that you have like multiple communication channels. Let's just start with that. Let me just go back to that slide. So you have to communicate to them by email. This if you are when they were integrating, like I said, for me, the experience I used to talk about, I used to share is that I remember before I joined Interswitch, I remember then that what we used to know then is that standard process at the time, this is like over a decade ago, was that standard is 3 weeks for integration. Then we used to have the WebPay. Again, we no longer have WebPay, we have the payment gateway that we have actually evolved over time. So what we used to have then is that Internet will tell you that our standard process is that it's 3 weeks before you can actually go live. And then I know then we had e-transact also. E-transact, because where I used to work before I joined Interswitch, we were actually like a portal provider, an edu portal provider for higher institutions, whereby higher institutions can use the portal to actually create their courses, upload their results, make school fees payments and the likes. So I know when it has to do with making of school fees payments, you have to integrate your payment gateway so that you don't have to worry about building that from scratch. So at the time, I know we had e-transact, we had Interswitch at the time. So then in the course of our presentation to this, to the vice chancellor of the school Senate committee, they usually ask us that, we ask them that, okay, we have two payment gateways that we can use. We have Interswitch, we have e-transact. And then we tell them that, okay, standard, maybe it's not a private example. Internet guys might be here. Let me know is that example. I shouldn't have called name. Let me not do that. Okay, but to answer your question, let me just go straight to it. To answer your question is that if you know that there's a reason for you to actually deprecate or build a newer version, it could be a compliance, it could be a regulatory pressure. So you need to communicate early. And then because again, the regulator that is coming to say, allow them to start accepting NIN or BVN on your API, they would also give you a timeline because they know that you need to make modifications to your system, and it also cascades down to those that have integrated to you. So now, because you are aware of the time they've given to you, you are also working with that timeline. So you also have to quickly update your API, have a new version if there is need for that, and then also while you are even still building, you can start communicating to them ahead of time that, that there's a regulatory requirement that says you need to start accepting NIN, that this feature will be rolled out from your existing service on this set date, and then the timeline for the application as communicated by regulatory or made by you is this state. So remember, you've not even started writing code, but because you have digested the communication from the regulator, you have also started communicating to your own consumers, so that by the time you are done, it's not a case of, oh, we are not aware when you started writing this code. So you have communicated early enough, you have been proactive with regards to your communication, and then there are different channels. So because communication can be lost in transit, if you are using just one communication channel, the person you're communicating to might be away on leave. For example, if you're communicating via email and you have like a month, if that person has gone on 1 month vacation and then it's only via email and they're only sending to that person's email address, it's not like a group email, that means that communication will be lost in transit. And then the ripple effect is that after a month, you've depleted the API, and then they see that start seeing that their API calls have started failing. They can take it up with you, even though you have evidences to say that, oh, you communicated. But because this person that communicated to, because you have chosen to use just one communication channel, that communication might be lost in transit. So you have to look for other channels. Are they on Slack with you guys when they were integrating? Are they on Teams? What did they use? Was it WhatsApp? Keep dropping notification reminders, drop updates there. If their API dashboard also, keep dropping notifications there. Have like a pop-up that will keep constantly reminding them of what you want to do at a particular point in time. In their webbook also call, you can have a metadata response. They're also passing a notification text that, oh, this API will be created at this particular date. When you do all of this, you are sure and you guarantee that no communication will be lost in transit, and your customers, they are duly aware of the changes you're about to make.
All right, thank you. So we have 2 more questions in the chat. I think we'll just take those 2 and that'll be all. So the first one is from Akambi. During testing of a new version of API, are you going to batch the customer or consumer you are testing with, that's separating them from the other customers before full migration of the new version of API? Is that easy to implement, and how?
Sorry, please, can you repeat that question again?
During testing of a new version of API,
okay,
are you going to batch the customer or consumer you are testing with, that's separating them from the other customers before full migration of the new version of API? Is that easy to implement, and how?
And so the way to go about that is just what we are familiar with, what we call beta testing, where you have to have a group of users that you can actually test before you actually roll it out to general public. So that strategy helps you to identify if there are areas of improvement that you need to do on the API before you then roll out to all your consumers. So what you can do in that case is that if you have customers that you know that, oh, when you want to make any change, they are always very responsive, they're also very fast, you can let them know and ahead of time and say, would like you guys to help us integrate to this before we then bring all of our customers. So they are aware, so they can do that integration, and then they can test with you on the new version. So that way, those that are still on the older version, they are still fine. So it's when you are comfortable with the feedback, you've stabilized, you've also factored in all of their feedback, and you've improved the newer version. It's until then that can also, you want to now start having to put it out there. You can now come up with a deprecation timeline on when you want to deprecate that particular API. But what's having to have like a set of group of people test with you before you roll out to the general public, it actually helps you look at things that you've not even thought of. Because again, when it comes to testing, again, there's a saying that says you cannot actually not exhaust all scenarios. So even though you have your own testing team that they would have tested the version 2 or the newer version, does not mean that they have actually covered those scenarios. But when you're now testing with the real users, there will be scenarios that probably in the course of you building the version 2, you never even thought of it. But you don't know how they are actually interacting with your API. That is why when you go with them, you test with them, you're able to also get feedback from them, and that can also help you better improve what you have done before you then roll out to all your other customers.
All right, thank you. So there's one more question in the chat, and we'll take this and that will be a wrap. So what is the most efficient approach for authenticating API requests? API key only, or client ID and API key?
For me, I don't think there's I don't think there's you can actually see that there's a best approach. In my few years in the tech space, I see people using just API key alone, and for them, if you pass a different API key, your request comes back with unauthorized. And some actually go with when you have to pass your client ID and client secrets, where you get a bearer token And then if you are sending so that bearer token will have like an expiry date. In some scenarios, well, I think if I want to go up, I think if you actually have a way that your token expires, I think it's the best. Because anybody if you leave your token to be open-ended, it means that anybody can actually hijack your token that is not integrated, that you don't even know them as your customer. But because they were able to get the token somewhere, they can start making calls, for example, maybe a payment, for example, and you start giving maybe a bill payment, for example, and then you start giving value when the actual payment was not done. But because they are aware of, oh, this is what your contract says, this is how I can call you, I can get, once I get the token, I never gets to expire, they can keep calling. I think the best approach is having a token that will always expire, maybe at every point in time. You are saying maybe every 10 minutes, every 3 hours, or on a daily basis. So if you have that approach, I think it helps you safeguard people that would want to come and probably hack into your system. I think I'll just go with the idea of having a token that will typically expire. Yes, thank you. Also, yes, IP whitelisting tool would also help. Very, very correct. Yes, so that you are only recognizing requests that is coming from this particular IP that you have actually whitelisted on your side. That's correct. Thank you for that.
All right. I think that's the last question. Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you so much for this session. I know that we have all learned so much about API versioning. Yeah, so let's move forward. Thank you. Guys, please let's appreciate him, right? It's not easy. This is over a decade of experience that has been shared with us in just 1 hour. So please let's try and appreciate him. Drop some nice comments. It's not only reactions. Let him see how you're feeling. Put it in words too. All right, thank you guys. So up next, I'm going to call on Chizurum. So she's actually the developer advocate for the Interswitch ecosystem. So she's just going to say a few words about what the Interswitch developer ecosystem is about and how you can interact with them. Chizurum, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I can't put on my camera.
Yeah,
Hi,
that's fine.
everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah. Thanks, Betty. Thanks, Elizabeth. And a huge thank you to everybody who attended the session. So I'm not going to take so much of your time. So first off, Interswitch has a developer community, if you're not aware of that. And we have a developer community for two main reasons. The first is to provide support for anybody, whether you're a software developer, your product manager, your QA, whatever you fall into, but mostly developers anyways. So the aim is just to provide support for developers who are building or using our APIs. So say you run into any issues, there's something that you do not quite understand, instead of the usual waiting for support or writing an email to support and waiting for a while, you can just come to the community. The people there will help you. And then added to that, we also have like support staff in our community that can attend to whatever questions that you have. And then the second reason why we have a community or we started a community is also to enable growth in a closer way. So I'm sure that a lot of you would have seen Interswitch rolling out a developer academy. By the way, if you haven't, you should check it out. For people you know, it will be very beneficial to them. But we also want to help developers grow. So we know that one-on-one mentorship can be hard. I mean, you can DM somebody who has probably worked at Interswitch, for example, Tayo, for 10 years, and they might never have time because Tayo's calendar is always full of meetings. So instead of waiting for that formal one-on-one mentorship, you can join the community, and we have sessions like this. Of course, with builders in fintech, we host ours, and the essence is just to connect you with the people that have built the ecosystem that's Nigerian fintech industry is basically utilizing. So from our head of engineering to other engineers that work at Interswitch. So it's mostly career growth and knowledge sharing and mentorship in an informal way. So these are the two reasons. I could share a link to that in the chat if that's okay with Betty and the team. But yeah, that's it. We have a developer community, and of course we provide support and then career growth to developers and the rest. That's it. Thank you, Betty.
All right, thank you so much. So she's going to share the link in the chat. So if you're interested in joining the Interswitch developer community, you can just do that right now. So yeah, moving forward. So we also have a community for people building in fintechs, right? This is a go-to place for fintech builders, whether you're in lending, you're in payments, right? whatever sector of fintech, you can also join us. So Elizabeth will be dropping the link to join the BIF community in the chats, and you can apply, you can join us and come meet other people and basically brainstorm. So let's innovate, let's build good stuff. You can subscribe to our newsletter. So we also have a newsletter that we send out once a month. So trust me, we're not going to disturb you. So it's basically a summary of everything that's happening in fintech, the different policies, everything that we think that you should know. So you don't want to miss it. So make sure you subscribe. This is on Substack. So we'll drop all the links in the chat as well. So we have a YouTube channel as well. So we are also going to upload this session on YouTube. So make sure you follow us. So in case there are certain parts that you missed, or you just want to do a recap, you can watch it. So it will be up in about a week's time, right? So yeah, you can follow us also across different social media. We are on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on LinkedIn, we're on X as well, or Twitter, as some people may call it. So you can follow us and keep in touch. So we also have various sessions. We have AMA sessions, we have master classes, we have so many activities that are happening simultaneously. And if you want to be part of this community, there's so much that you can gain, right? It's not just having master classes. There's so much that you can do. There are people that you can meet, you can brainstorm with, you can basically ask questions. So it's always helpful, right, for you to meet people that are part of something that you're already doing, people that are thinking on the same wavelength as you. So, right, you need to join us if you're not already part of us. So all the links are already in the chat, right? You can join the Interswitch developer community. You can follow us on X, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter, join the community, and also follow our channel, right? So I think we're right on time, actually, because this session was supposed to end by 12:30. It's a wrap. All right, thank you everyone for joining this session. I hope to see you at our next session as well. So we'll be having more sessions as well, and we put in a lot. So follow us on social media, turn on the notifications. We have a whole lot more planned, right? I know this is the end of the year now. Imagine what we would have next year. So you don't want to miss it. So follow us. And also thank you so much to the Interswitch team for this session. It was so insightful, and we're very, very grateful to be partnering with you on this. And thank you, Tayo. Thank you, Cheesy. Right. So you can also email Cheesy Room. Sorry. You can also email Choosy Room to know more about the Interswitch developer community, or if you just have any other questions, I'm sure she'll be of help. So thank you everyone for joining, and have a lovely, lovely weekend. Take care. Bye.